Welcome, and thank you for joining us for tonight's celebration of the 2020 Trillium Book Award for Fiction. This event continues our Words Across Canada series, and we're pleased to have partnered with the Kingston WritersFest and Ontario Creates for tonight's conversation. If you've been enjoying our programming so far, please like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a live stream. I'm Rebecca DM, and I'm the Communications Coordinator for the Word on the Street Toronto. The Word on the Street, or WOTS for short, is a festival of books, ideas, and imagination. But we're also more than a festival. WOTS is a community. We asked, and you told us what mattered most about the WOTS experience: discovery, inspiration, and connection. Our community is creative and resilient, and we're excited to bring the Word on the Street to you in your homes. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that WOTS Toronto operates on land that is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Anishinaabe and Allied Nations to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people with long histories on this land. We are privileged to live, work, and create in this territory and strive to act with awareness and solidarity. We encourage you to educate yourself about the land you occupy, wherever you're tuning in from. And on our brand new website, we actually have a link so that you can see what native land you are currently tuning in from. Before I ask our moderator, Ali Hassan, to come on stream, a few words about the next events in the series happening right here on the WOTS Toronto YouTube channel. Wild Words North returns to Words Across Canada this Friday, September 25th at 8 p.m. ET, for a conversation with best-selling memoirists Jessie Thistle and Helen Knott, moderated by Tracy Lindbergh. And of course, don't forget to register for WOTS 2020, our first ever virtual festival of storytelling, ideas, and imagination is streaming live all day on September 26th and 27th. You can find more details about these events on our website and Eventbrite. Links in the banner below, live in the comments section, and you can find it all at toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca. All right, now allow me to turn things over to CBC Canada Reads and all-around comedian, Ali Hassan.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Good evening. If you're listening in the evening right now, how are you? It's nice to have you here for the Word on the Street 2020 Trillium Award for Fiction. Please do look up Word on the Street. Look up their website. You can support them by buying a T-shirt. And Rebecca, if you wanted to send me one of those T-shirts, I wouldn't say no to that. You made that red look good. I would, if the pandemic has taught us anything, this is a time to build up our T-shirt collections. We are going to talk about literature and not T-shirts. And I want to introduce a number of the guests, all of the panelists that I have with me today. You will know some of them. You have read some of them. I have gotten a chance to read most of their work, and it has been a joy in this short little time. In fact, all the reading that I've been doing lately has been so wonderful and so rewarding, probably more so than any other time, just because of this time off that we have. And I hope you're sharing in the same experience. The first panelist I want to bring up is Martha Baillie. Martha's 2009 novel is called The Incident Report. It was nominated for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. Her novel in 2014 was called The Search for Heinrich Schlogel, with Peddler Press in Canada and Tin House in the US. She lives in Toronto, and she's joining us right now. Hi, Martha.
Hi, Ali. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Secondly, on our panelists, on our panel, one of our panelists is Zalika Reid-Benta. She is right now celebrating the fact that her short story collection, Frying Plantain, won the Denuda Glede Literary Award, the Rakuten Kobo Emerging Writer Prize for Literary Fiction, and was longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. Her education is an MFA in fiction from Columbia University. She's an alumnus of the Banff Center Writing Studio. Zalika, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. It's great to be here.
Great to
how are
have
you?
We are also going to welcome Seth. He is a cartoonist. I don't know if cartoonist covers it. Graphic novelist, I feel, is.
Cartoonist is fine.
Cartoonist is fine.
Yeah.
Seth, you are cartoonist behind this comic book series, Palookaville. It started in the Stone Age as a pamphlet. It is now a semi-annual hardcover. Your comics have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Best American Comics, McSweeney's Quarterly. Your illustrations have appeared in numerous publications, including the cover of the New Yorker, The Walrus, Canadian Notes and Queries. You're also a Lemony Snicket's partner for the new Young Readers series, All the Wrong Questions. And you have illustrated and designed a new deluxe edition of Stephen Leacock's Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town. You've designed several classic comics, reprint series, notable collections of work by Charles Schultz, John Stanley, and Doug Wright. But I don't have to tell you that, Seth, but I do have to tell others that. Welcome, Seth. How are you?
Great. It's great to be here. Nice to meet you.
Nice to have you here as well. And finally, our 2020 Trillium Award winner is Téa Mutonji. Téa is an award-winning poet and writer born in Congo-Kinshasa. She now lives and writes in Scarborough, Ontario. She was named Emerging Writer of the Year in 2017 by the Ontario Book Publishers Organization. Shut Up, You're Pretty is her first book. It has received rave reviews, won the Rogers finalist for Rogers Writers Trust of Canada, award winner of the Publishing Triangle Prize, and of course the Trillium Award. Téa, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
You've been busy. You've been singing today, apparently, I hear. You've been on other chats where your voice has been used.
Yeah, it's apparently my second career. We'll see.
We'll see. You don't seem to think so. You thought you had a bad voice. People are telling you you've got some...
Terrible.
Well, it takes the pressure off maybe a little bit. Because this is why I wanted to ask you a number of questions and talk about things like this, especially when you have early works that are celebrated. It's always hard to follow a good debut, right? Whether you're a musician or a comedian or whatever kind of artist you are, a strong debut does put some pressure on you. Martha, your book in 2019, that was nominated for a Scotiabank Giller Prize, the Incident Report.
That's true.
What did that do for you? Was that exactly the boost you needed, or was that more, darn it, now what do I do? How do I top this?
Sorry, you vanished. My connection may not be good.
Oh, yeah. Did I vanish? Oh, I was going to say, Martha, you're frozen or there's just a picture of you there.
I guess it froze. Sorry about that.
It might be me as well. But did you hear my question to you?
I only heard you mentioned the incident report being nominated way back when, and I didn't hear the rest of the question.
You only heard what you needed to hear, I guess. Right?
Okay.
The follow-up to that was, how did you feel after a debut piece of work of yours was celebrated? Do you feel some level of pressure, or did you feel like that was exactly what you needed as a morale boost and the sort of the confidence in yourself?
It was great. It was terrific, because that was a novel that I had an extraordinarily hard time getting published. It was a novel in 144 fragments, and it took a brave publisher to publish.
Martha, I've lost you again, and I see Seth moving, so that might be... It took a brave publisher, I just heard you say.
It took a brave publisher to publish a novel in 144 fragments. And so it was wonderful that courage was rewarded with it being nominated.
Zalika, I noticed that you wrote this in your acknowledgements, something that really caught my eye, because I think I have a life as an actor as well, and I felt this way, and I know comedians who feel this way. You said at some level you felt for a while as a fraud as a writer, calling yourself a writer. You didn't feel worthy of that. So was this, getting this great bump ups for your work for frying plantain? Did that really help you? Did that put you? Is the fraudulence gone? Is that feeling gone?
No, I don't think it's gone. I think that it depends on the day, kind of like with everything else. Sometimes I feel like I know what I'm doing, and sometimes I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. But I also just never imagined that my collection would get the attention that it has gotten. So that's been like a real privilege to experience, definitely, especially since I also didn't think for a while that my collection was going to be published. I kind of put it in a drawer for a while until someone was just like, no, like, I think you should really like try to get that out there. So yeah, it just kind of feels like years of work has kind of created this experience, and that's been really, really great.
Well, I'll tell you, just because of my own time crunch here, I was able to read 5 of the stories. I read the first story, and then I read Frying Plantain, then I went through a few more. And I feel like a confidence comes out of you. I would never have known that this was an early piece of writing, and only because of your own acknowledgments. You said, I feel like a fraud as a writer sometimes. I was like, no way. You should. That's something that's in you. That's all up here. I don't think you got to worry about that.
Thank you.
Téa, I wanted to ask you the similar thing. You have, I don't know, there's a, it feels like a mastery you have of writing. It does not feel, I was very surprised to hear that this was a debut album. I'm still in music. Because of your singing earlier today, I'm still an album. Album's your second project. Today we discuss your book. I wouldn't have thought that this was a debut novel. Do you feel like a fraud? Do you feel pressure that you've gotten all this attention on your book, or is this exactly what you needed to move forward?
Pressure is good for me. I've always worked best with pressure, but I do feel like a complete fraud. This writing Shop Your Pretty was actually my first attempt at writing fiction. So for that alone, it's been really stressful because I'm just like, I don't really know what I'm doing. Please stop reading it right now. But I guess I'm kind of just trying to push through that feeling and keep doing whatever work that feels natural to me. But the feeling doesn't go away. It haunts me at night. It's bad.
I know. I'm going through it myself. I'm writing currently, and I go through this like, who'd want to read this? Why would anybody want to read this? But then I remembered that this is exactly what I went through with comedy before I got on stage. I was like, is this even funny? This is just words. I don't even know if this was funny to begin with. And you have an audience with comedy and with music that can give you that feedback. With writing, you rely on those editors, and you rely on your mom sometimes, and you're like, oh, Mom, you would always say it's good. Maybe it isn't. So it's tough as a writer. Seth, you are more of a veteran writer here. You can maybe shed some light on this, give some guidance. What does how do you get some confidence in your work? How do you keep writing and stop feeling like a fraud? Or do you?
Well, it's funny, I come from a different reality kind of than mainstream writers, because as an underground cartoonist, or whatever we were called, my generation of artists, like, we never expected to have any kind of an audience. I mean, we started in a very small kind of subculture, and my whole goal was to be able to make the work and continue to make it somehow. It was, even just getting the work out into the world was complicated. The big surprise is how the graphic novel has somehow managed to succeed in publishing. And now there's a tremendous number of young graphic cartoonists out there who are trying to, make real art, which is like very gratifying to me. But to be honest, I mean, I always felt like I was working on a very small stage. So it's hard to get stage fright if there's only like 2 people in front of you. So, I mean, it's always just a process of just working. And, as all writers, artists do, you're in a room by yourself. It's mostly a negotiation between yourself all these years, figuring out if anything's any good, struggling forward. I feel like, the funny thing is I feel like it's not who's really the most talented, it's who keeps working. You've got to work so long to achieve anything, to make the work any good. You just got to keep showing up every day, going to work. That's the real hard part. I knew people who were super talented at 20 years old, certainly when I was like producing the worst work imaginable. But, those people dropped out and I kept working. So at some point I got a little better. I really think that's the important part.
I couldn't agree more. I think stamina and sort of determination and staying power. I have a friend who's a comedian. He's a mentor of mine, and he would say, these people come to me after my shows and they ask me, I want to be a comedian. How can I be a comedian? And he's like, you have to be willing to go on stage at 12:30 in the morning when the entire audience, except for 3 drunk people, have left. And you have to be willing to tell those jokes. He said, it's just like you, Seth. He knew dozens of comedians when he started who were much funnier than him, who have fallen off, and they're like, oh, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. So yeah, you have to be willing to get your hands dirty and stay dirty for some time.
I'm glad I'm not a comedian, though. Oh my God. I mean, it's one thing to get up in the morning and produce some terrible writing. It's another thing to stand on a stage and bomb. No, thank you.
Yeah. For a guy who likes the small stage, the 2 people, the comedy arena may not be exactly up your thing, up your alley. No.
Yeah, I think I'll stick to the studio.
At some level, we maybe enjoy the humiliation. I don't know. There's something sick about it that we have to fix, I suppose. I wanted to talk a little bit about your processes, how you go about doing the writing that you did, Martha. It's interesting. At one point in the book, in Sister Language, your sister does talk about this frenetic energy of schizophrenia. And that was exactly how I was describing this reading. It's a frenetic energy. And then on the next page, sort of calm down and get, because like yourself, I guess you wrote that, there was this quote that I put, you talk about my timidity, my law-abiding linguistic prudery. And I was like, oh, well, her writing actually calms me down. So I guess I'm a bit of a linguistic prude myself, but I wonder if you can explain the book. I've sort of gone ahead and trampled on stuff for people who don't know the book. Explain what the book is and what your process was on how you got this book out. It's very, very interesting. We've seen correspondence between friends before, letters. This is siblings, and one of your sibling also has mental health issues, which made this very, very interesting read.
Thank you, Ali. And you haven't trampled on anything. This was the first time I've actually done a collaborative work, and that in and of itself I found fascinating. I think both my sister and I agreed that outside of the collaboration we would have done things completely differently. So sort of once we'd begun, the work demanded certain things of each of us and pushed us into new territory, which made it very exciting and at the same time quite risky. My sister had schizophrenia and struggled with that for many decades, and she was chronically suicidal and led a very isolated life. And she wrote continuously and also made astonishing visual art. She was sort of a brilliant linguist. And at a certain point, I had approached her at various points to try and see if I could help her get some of her work out into the public. And she had very ambiguous feelings about showing her work. She referred to us as the human world, capital H, which she no longer felt she belonged to. And she also had, as well as schizophrenia, something called formal thought disorder, which means that language breaks apart into smaller bits all the time. So if she heard the word appear, it would break into ap and ear or ap and pair. So it made conversation very hard, because if you were speaking to her, what you were saying would be continuously breaking apart. On the other hand, she was totally at home reading James Joyce and Gertrude Stein, and she was Beckett, those were sort of her 3 favorite writers where she felt totally in her element. To give you a very brief answer to process, she asked me if she did all her work on a manual typewriter, and she asked me if she gave me some printed pages of her work, would I respond on the opposite page so that our text wouldn't contaminate each other? And I think for her, as a paranoid schizophrenic, that was quite literal. She needed to separate things. So I got out an old school binder and took home about 20 of her texts. And then my job was to try and respond on the other side. And I really didn't want to analyze. I didn't want to tell her story. I just wanted to create a space in which her voice could come out and be shared. And it became a sort of work of call and response. And eventually she started typing footnotes onto my pages, kind of transgressing, breaking her own rule, and then began typing me long letters. And I learned a lot about her in the process of making this book. And it was a great joy.
And I think if I understand correctly, her work was not edited at all. You didn't want to edit her words.
Oh, she wouldn't have. She would not allow a punctuation. What you get in the book are scans of her exact pages. She allowed me to move things around. Once we had a few hundred pages, we both agreed we better stop. So the letters that are in it are not in chronological order. So I tried to sort of create an arc. I treated it like a piece of fiction. To me, if there was a narrative, it was this growing trust in the process of making the book as the communication expanded. So I tried to reorganize things. I tried to give you those moments of rest. So we tried to put in visual elements because a lot of her writing is very, very intense and dense, as well as explosive. So she gave me full liberty to shape the book, to remove parts, reorder, reorganize, but her actual texts had to remain exactly as is.
Yeah. Explosive is a good word. You know, when I got to your page, I would be like, okay, the roller coaster has flattened, and then we go back and like, oh man, here we go. It was really a very, very interesting read. Zalika, I wanted to ask you about your writings. It's a collection of stories. How did you start writing these? How do you choose in what order you put them? And I mean, I think in your case, it really was, the order was from your youth to your, older adolescence. So I guess that helped you format it a little bit. But how did you decide which stories to write and how to write these stories?
Oh, right, from Kara's youth. So actually, the last story is the first story that I wrote, and it wasn't the last story until I got to the editing process, because the people around me were just like, there's a kind of elegiac quality to frying plantain. I think that should go at the end, and that didn't bother me. But it's really funny because when I first started writing Frying Plantain, I thought I was going to be writing a novel. So I wrote the story, and my instructors were like, or I thought it was a chapter, and they were like, that's a story. And I said, oh, okay. Well, I'll just try to write a chapter again. And so then I wrote another chapter, and they're like, that's a story. You're just writing stories. And so then I was just kind of like, okay, well, that seems to be what comes naturally to me. So I'm just going to continue to write these stories. And I didn't write them in chronological order. I am not very good with sitting down and like forcing myself to write. If I feel like writing, then I write. If I don't feel like writing, then I don't. And so usually what comes to me, and I don't like to think about my process. I don't like to analyze it, because I think that takes the kind of joy out of writing for me. And I don't want it to feel like a mundane exercise. So usually if I'm walking or if I'm doing something else, then an idea will hit me. So one of the stories, Snow Day, which happens to be the second story in the collection. I think I wrote that like the seventh story. That was the seventh one I wrote. I was actually at my internship, and I was supposed to be reading other manuscripts. And this idea of snow came to me, and I was like, I have to stop what I'm doing and write that down. And then it kind of became this weird thing where I did my internship work at home, and then I wrote at my internship. So it just became this kind of like, because I guess my mind was like, well, you're going to work and you're not thinking so intensely about the writing. And that's when I could just let myself go and not think too much about it. So yeah, I also start with dialogue a lot. I love to write dialogue. So usually conversations are in my head first. And then I'll start that conversation. I have no idea what the story is going to be about. I just know that we have to get to that conversation. And by the end of the story, I'm like, oh, that's what that was about. Cool. So that's kind of just how I did this particular collection.
You know, I've upset many, many people by saying that I don't enjoy, let's say, Alice Munro or Margaret Atwood's, 18-page description of a wintry landscape. Maybe that's more Alice Munro. That's just not, there is a beauty I don't like. What I really love is dialogue. And I really, especially when it's accents of people from the Caribbean and accents of people in different countries. I recently read Megan Gale Cole's, for Canada Reads, Megan Gale Cole's has a book called Small Game Hunting. It's a longer, Small Game Hunting at the Local Coward Gun Club. Very long title, very long book, 422 pages. What kept me engaged with that book, page after page, was all these characters from Newfoundland and the dialogue's dead. When I can sort of see the movie of a book, I'm very, very engaged. And I found that with your book. So
Yeah, that's how I know that I'm in a good flow. If I'm writing and it feels like a movie in my mind and I can see what's happening, then I know that I'm onto something. If I can't see it, then I'm like, this is not working. And it's funny because I also really don't like writing description. I don't like to do it. And so in the earlier drafts of all of my stories, they would just be like 5 pages of dialogue and people would be like, Zalika, that's great. Where is this? Are they sitting? Are they standing? Are you walking? Like, what's going on? It's just talking heads. And so then I had to like force myself to be like, all right, I have to like set the mood or set the scene and everything like that. So yeah, dialogue is usually what I like fly away with, and I have to rein myself back because yeah, you need to know where they are and what.
Sure. Well, I think that advice served you well. There were times when I was reading and you described like a face that your mother or your grandmother's making, and then I found myself trying to make that face. Like, how does somebody actually? How would you? So it was. It's good. It's above and beyond the dialogue. It really paints a good picture.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
That also just a little thing, because it's fiction, so it's Kara's like grandmother and Kara's mother. It's not my life.
You know what? That's my mistake. That's my mistake. And I was going to ask you, do people think that that's your life? Because at the end, you thank your mother and you thank your grandmother. And there's a possibility that you wouldn't have thanked that particular grandmother if it was your life. Yeah, no, absolutely. When I say you, I'm talking about your character, Kara, for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Téa, let me ask you about you. Seth, I'm going to leave you to the end because your process was the longest. And I want to really dig into that a little bit. But Téa, let me ask you about your process and how you create these characters. How much is it informed by your own life, and how much of it is just truly pure fiction that just sort of comes to your mind?
Right. When I first began working on these particular set of stories, because it was for the next contest, and I had one summer to kind of get together a manuscript so I can submit on time for September, I just went through my folder of everything I've ever written in my entire existence. And I noticed a theme in my fiction where it always seemed to be about one particular character. And so I kind of had a section that was poetry, a section that was essays, and then a section that was entirely fiction. And when I started working with Vivek, we decided that we would only focus on the fiction part, and thus became Shut Up, You're Pretty. And the character of Lowly, she wasn't intentionally lowly. At first, it was just a bunch of different girls who happened to grow up in Galloway and who happened to be from Scarborough. And the more I started working on it, I kind of forced them to be one person, but originally they were separate characters. But they just kind of had such similar experiences that I was like, let's just make it one person. And in order to do that, I drew a timeline of like 13, 14, 15, like a complete age timeline, very tight. And I kind of picked themes based on the stories that were there that would fit in a chronological order. So it really was a matter of organizing stories I already had in order to then make one person's life work together. And this process was entirely new to me because I wasn't used to working with fiction, and I definitely wasn't used to creating an entire story arc for like an entire person. But when it comes to writing single stories, there is this trick that my nonfiction and I guess fiction professor taught me at university. It's Professor Andrew Westall, which was to write a character dialogue chart. So it's like 10 things only one specific character would say. So I had 10 things written about what Joey would say, and she was my star character of my life. Every story I've ever written before I became about Lowly was about Lowly's obsession with Joey. So I had like all these things that only this Jolie character would say. And then that's how she was created. But I wanted my protagonist to be specifically a Black girl. And that's when Loli became more of importance because, well, obviously, like, Jolie's white. So that was a whole, like, political decision that I made while I was writing, long after all the stories were already written. And I find that today I still kind of revert back to the same idea. Whenever I'm working with fiction, I start with dialogue as well. I start with unique things that are true to this person, their life, their environment, their everything. And then I try to create a story based on what that was said. I sometimes feel like the entire book is entirely based on Jolie has a line where she says, I need cigarettes or else I'll die. And I sometimes think that that's the whole point of Shut Up You're Pretty, is to get the cigarettes, which at the time when I first wrote the short story, If Not Happiness, it was about these little girls who were trying to find happiness in their environment by any means necessary. And cigarettes was just basically an extended metaphor for that. So I feel like sometimes when I think of Shut Up You're Pretty, the goal is to get the cigarette by the end of the collection, which Jolie, we don't know if she does, but I guess for Loli, we can assume that she does.
Mm-hmm.
I still kind of write like that today.
Those are the stakes. Those are the stakes. I have friends who don't smoke, but when they drink, they smoke. And
Smokers, tell them.
they're those guys. If I don't get a cigarette, I'm gonna die. I'm like, you're not gonna die. Everything's gonna be fine. No, we need cigarettes. We need them. Like, we can't go get them. It's ridiculous. You're gonna get in an Uber and get some. It's high stakes. It's high stakes for cigarettes. Get those cigarettes.
It's really it.
I'm curious, Téa, bouncing off what Zalika had said about not being something I really connect with, not being somebody who sits every morning or isn't keen to sit every single day and write. You write when you feel like writing, and you write when it comes to you. What's your writing like in that regard? Is it a sort of a disciplined daily, let's just see what I can get out today, or is it when inspiration strikes?
I'm desperately trying to make it more of a real thing. Like, I feel that I don't care enough the way that I want to. My whole life, writing was really kind of like not necessarily an escape, but it was my hobby. It was what I did after work. I was a waitress for a very long time, and at 3 a.m, I couldn't fall asleep, so I would essentially write short stories or poems, and that was always my writing time. So now to be actively writing with the intention to publish, it's a bit more difficult because I don't want to stay up till 4 a.m. So I have dedicated writing hours throughout my day, and I sit down, I give it 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. And if it doesn't work, I do walk away, but I do set a set amount of hours every day to get the work that I want done. And I just hope that it comes out. Most days it doesn't. And when I'm shopping, that's when the story comes, and I hate it. But that's actually the reality of writing. You can't really control it. And I'm just trying to be empathetic about that and apply that, right? Like today I had a terrible writing day, but I'm sure that tomorrow when I'm doing the garbage or something, a story will come and I'll start writing. So
this is it.
Just trust the process, yeah.
Inspiration has struck. Vacuuming, snow shoveling, and taking a shower. The more brainless the activity is when I go, wait a minute, I sat for 8 hours and didn't have anything as good as I did in this 1 minute of vacuuming under the couch, So yeah, it's a weird thing, but sometimes it really is about clearing your mind.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke to Colin Mockery once about this. I don't know if you know Colin Mockery. He's an improviser. He was on Whose Line Is It Anyway? And so his whole life is just improv. And I said, how do you prepare for improv? What do you do? How do you get it so your mind is sharp and active? What do you do backstage? And he said, usually eat a sandwich. And I was like, no, that doesn't really sound like a process. He goes, oh, it very much is. It's about clearing my mind completely, doing the most banal, brainless thing so that I can then sort of open my mind up to whatever comes my way. So that is, that's the wonderful and cruel thing about art. It strikes at the weirdest times. Seth, let me ask you. You have a different life where sometimes you have deadlines, right? The Walrus and the New Yorker, and as you have deadlines you have to hit. And let me ask you that first. How do you go about your work? You have a goal in mind, and you just sit down and work towards it on a daily basis?
Yeah, I'm pretty disciplined. I mean, I have a very rigid kind of in the studio life, because I'm an artist. I don't go downstairs and like sit down in front of a keyboard and like start writing. So it's like I'm doing two different things. So I might do a bit of writing. I might write for like an hour, and then I could be drawing the stuff that goes with that writing for a week. So I don't have that intense process that writers have, where you have to be in there by yourself, close the door, turn off the television. I mean, I have that experience for a short period of time. And then when you're drawing, well, the drawing is a very different experience. I mean, you can have a movie playing in the background. You can like listen to books on tape, whatever. It's a very, very different part of the brain that you're using when you're drawing. And comics is an extremely slow, laborious process. I mean, it takes you forever to do these pages. It's no pleasure whatsoever. It's not like, sitting around with a sketchbook and having a great fun drawing a picture. It's boring. You draw the same person over and over again. It's very much like it's a craft. So much of my life is spent like sitting at the table, just working on like a craftsperson, like making pottery or weaving a tapestry or something. It's a very slow process. So for me, the writing is only, once in a while. When I was working on Clyde Fans, which I worked on for 20 years, I obviously didn't sit down and write for like 20 years. I like worked out the story 20 years ago. And then over a period of, a few months every year, I would draw some pages in that story. The most remarkable thing in the whole process was just that at the end of 20 years, it was pretty much the book I planned back in like 1997. Very little actually changed in the story. What changed was that the way I told the story developed over 20 years. Like how I tell a story now is quite different, but it still was the exact same story, still ended on the same line I wrote 20 years ago. It's just your mind changes on how you would tell a story in all that time.
But is it fair to say that also the market changed and became more open to graphic novels? And they were
it certainly did.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I started Clyde Fans, I mean, that was a world where we were trying to sell, like my generation of cartoonists, which was a small handful of cartoonists who were trying to produce adult stories for adults in the comics medium. This seemed like a crazy idea at the time in the 80s. We had to sell our work through comic shops, and comic shops were really only interested in fantasy sort of superhero stuff. So it was a very small market. Something happened at the turn of the century. I still don't really know what happened. I don't know why graphic novels suddenly got a foothold in the real world. But over the last 20 years, I mean, the audience I was writing Clyde Fans for when I started it and the audience that I released the finished book to were quite different. I mean, that first audience was just a subculture of comics fans. And then the audience I released the book to was just a general population of casual readers, if there's such a thing.
Let me ask you, I think this might be on the mind of people watching. What drives you to do that laborious element of this? You're basically telling a story. I mean, I know why you would for McSweeney's or New York Magazine, whatever the case may be. You're drawing one thing, but to draw these graphic novels and put yourself on the path of almost a certain arthritis in your hands. What is it that propels you to keep writing that way and drawing and doing graphics?
Well, it's not to be too pretentious, but I guess it's kind of the same as being a poet. Why does anybody write a poem when it's like so difficult to find an audience to read that poem? I just love the comics medium. When I was a kid, I wanted to draw Spider-Man. And by the time I was 25, I didn't want to draw Spider-Man anymore, but I still loved the comics medium. And I just wanted to find something I could use it for. It's frustrating, though, I must admit. You spend, months drawing something, and then you put it before someone and they read it in 3 seconds. It's a very, very quick medium for reading. I mean, it's kind of depressing when after 20 years of working on a book, somebody will say, "It was great. I read it this afternoon and I really enjoyed it." Or I read it in an hour. I mean, they don't know they're breaking your heart, but That's just the nature of the mediums. It's kind of like making a film. So much of it is not in the immediate experience of reading it. It's in like what you're taking in kind of on other levels.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I mean, we've sort of teased the audience enough here by talking about your work and why you wrote it and the process of writing it. I think this might be a good time as we come to the final third of this hour to maybe have you read some of your work, some selected passages, to give people who either are familiar with your work and would love to hear it in your voice, or people who don't know your work just yet, a feeling for it. Martha, would you be keen to start and read whatever it is, a passage or a page?
Sure. The book is divided between, as I mentioned earlier, it's a book of call and response. Sorry, these are very big headphones. So I'm going to read just a few passages, and I'm going to start with my sister's voice, and then switch to mine, and then back to hers, and back to me. So starting with her. And as you can see, it's all typed. I want to write about how schizophrenic cognitive disorganization and formal thought disorder are a piranha that turns the schizophrenic into a pariah. But isn't the subject too overwhelming, too great in its scope? And to be writing from inside the problem as the problem. And my response.
Martha, if you can still hear me, we cruelly, your internet stuttered at my response, and then we didn't actually hear your response. Your sister's work got the better of you there. I think, Martha, we've got quite frozen right now, which is a shame because we'll get back to her response, obviously. But Martha, you're back?
I'm back. Did I disappear?
You disappeared at my response to your sister's.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'll take it from there. Thanks, Sally. Yeah. I turn the key and push. The door begins to swing, but bangs against its chain. A barrier she's fashioned from a leash. This means she's home. Mouth to slit. Sister, hello, sister. From some room she comes. The chain unfastened, I step inside, admitted. Begin by admitting. A good beginning, but how much either party will admit, or admit to, is never a known factor. I've brought a desire. We begin. We've begun before and often. It so happens this day our desires agree to discuss language, the many ways it rescues and fails her. We are readers. She became a reader earlier and more avidly than I. Much lends itself to reading. Here's my reading of her hallway and the 2 rooms opening off it. Few sources of physical comfort, evidence of other forms of succor, objects stacked and ordered, things grouped in evolving compositions, small and large material repetitions, an arid, calm, yarn and wire, smell of enclosure, paper, ink, anxiety leaking and drafting, paint, scissors, typewriter, open box of typewriter ribbons, glue, dust, more paper, language everywhere. And then my sister, just to close. Randomness pulls and something pulls back. I am the something, but I'm also its attraction to randomness. Or how the random is drawn ineluctably to it, how the random always finds it, me, out. And I respond, I ask her to comment on the idea of self as resistance. She has taped her answer to the opposite page. The proof that I exist is in transitions from utterly random, in the sense that it is always roiling around, language potential, into whatever utterances I am making these ams. I am what makes these transits. I am language potential, manifest, unmanifest, infinite, the potentates, taters, eight, potent, the lingua fagus am. Thanks.
Thank you, Martha. You know, you mentioned in the book that sometimes months would go by where your sister wouldn't speak to anybody other than her therapist, and then would speak to you or not even speak to you for a little while. And you feel that in her writing. It's just everything's coming out. It's like an excitement. It feels like an excitement where she's finally able to get a whole bunch of stuff out that she hasn't been able to say to anybody. As you said, she lived in very severe isolation.
Yeah.
Isolation. Yeah. Thank you for that. Zalika, how do you feel about reading passage or passages?
Sure, yes. So I'm going to read from the story Lovely, which is about my character Kara meeting her first boyfriend. So I'm going to start when she actually meets him. I met the boyfriend at Rochelle's 18th birthday. The party started at 7, and my mother was going to pick me up at 10, even though no one else would even show up until at least 8:30. When I got to Rochelle's, her mother, Miss B, was still bustling around the kitchen, cooking what smelled like jerk chicken, and Rochelle was hanging up streamers in the basement, standing on top of the ribbed leather couch to reach the ceiling. She wasn't even dressed yet, wearing gray lounge shorts and a tattered shirt with the Jamaican flag splayed across the chest. "Hold the other side, Nush," she said. I climbed onto the sofa and balanced myself on the frame, taping the other end of the streamer against the wall. Rochelle suddenly got irritated. "Hey, are you gonna set up the stereo or just stare at my friend's Batsy all day?" "Damn, Shell, why you gotta be like that?" I hadn't noticed there was someone else in the basement with us. The boyfriend was crouched in a corner by the entrance, bent in front of a large speaker. I glanced away as soon as I spotted him. I couldn't stare at cute boys for too long. "That's just my Brampton cousin," Rochelle told me. "He's a Star Wars geek." "Shell? Oh." I stepped off the couch and followed Rochelle back upstairs. I like Lord of the Rings better. At 8 o'clock, another 3 people showed up, a guy in a do-rag and 2 girls in jersey dresses, one of them sporting the Lakers and the other one the Sixers. Anita, Ishani, and Jordan probably wouldn't come until my mom picked me up at 10. They always try to be the latest ones to anything. We stayed upstairs. There weren't enough people for the basement to become the place to be yet. Rochelle and the other girls skipped to her bedroom to find her something to wear, and I sat down in the living room since I wouldn't be of any help. I'd come in basics, blue jeans and a fitted camouflage shirt. I never spent more than 10 minutes deciding what to wear. Miss B had finished most of the cooking, and the dining table was crowded with aluminum trays stuffed with rice and peas, jerk chicken, potato salad, curry goat. We weren't supposed to start eating until at least another 10 people showed up, but the boyfriend crept around the kitchen and snatched a couple of fried dumplings from a pan on the stove, keeping a lookout for Miss B, who'd gone to the bathroom. He handed me a dumpling as he sat next to me on the floral living room sofa. Do-rag wash rust from the armchair. "Wow, you couldn't even get me any? I only got 2 hands, don't I?" "Oh, I see," he said, grinning. "This is one of your moves, right? Being all chivalrous and shit? Whatever." I stared at the dumpling. "Thanks. The truth is, I don't like fried dumplings. I prefer them boiled and mixed in stew with yams and chicken, a preference that everyone tells me is weird."
Thank you very much. See, no fraudulence. No fraudulence at all. The confidence in that. That's great.
Thank you.
Seth, I know that you're, obviously you write, this is a graphic novel, so it's not as easy to read it, in a linear fashion, but I know that you wanted to have you had some thoughts that you wanted to share about your writing.
Actually, I found a little passage I can read.
Okay.
It's funny. I was going to say, yes, it's very difficult to read from a graphic novel because obviously it's pictures. I mean, this is what you're looking at. And mostly they don't make any sense. And you certainly don't want to be doing that little thing of like in panel 1, somebody says, and then in panel 2, somebody says. So I actually found a little passage that I can excerpt where I can just read the words. This is from a section of the book where one of the 2 brothers is describing in great detail their mother's room, sort of monologue. So I'm just going to read a short excerpt from that. Over to the left is a large photograph of her parents, my grandparents, retouched so heavily that it looks more like a painting than a photograph. Their faces have that stoic look so often seen in portraits of that era. In grandmother's face, I can see the understanding, that life is no picnic. Against the north wall is a 3-drawer chiffonier stuffed with clothing. 2 Kewpie-style novelty dolls stand on top. The first, like brand new, was won at the Canadian National Exhibition in 1922. Won by an ardent suitor, or so she always said. It's made of a pulpy composition material and has a sweet painted face. The second figure is more elfish and has lost his arms. Both of them have a knowing look about them, and I have often expected them to speak, but they have kept silent. Under the bed are 2 boxed items of interest. One box contains a man's hat, preserved in crepe paper. There is no question about who this hat belonged to. Why it is still here is anyone's guess. The other box holds the broken shards of a vase, a gift from her father, my grandfather. Broken by Abraham as a boy when he was not supposed to be in her room. A thing so precious that even smashed, it could not be tossed away. All this is just the tip of the iceberg, the mere surface of the room. I could go deeper, zoom in even closer. It might be worthwhile to study the shape of each object, what feelings they evoke, or the relationships between them, just where they have been placed and what that means. The layers of paint on the walls or the curve of the mattress, the marks on the floor where a dresser stood for a decade before taking up a new post against the opposite wall. A lifetime could be spent tracing out the subtleties of this simple room, a secret message spelled out in boxes and bottles and broken shards.
Thank you, Seth. And it should be mentioned, your story, this Clyde Fans, I thought, I just keep seeing OnlyFans and this fans and fans of this, that I assumed it was, people, an audience, a clamoring audience, until I started reading it. It's a product, fans.
Yeah,
Clyde,
electric fans.
Like Acme fans.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
It's an examination of capitalism, peeling back.
No, for many years, when you would Google the word Clyde Fans, what you would get would be the fans of the Clyde football team somewhere in Scotland.
Right.
Right. I think now, hopefully, they're getting my book. We'll see.
That's all you can ask for, huh?
Yeah.
That's bigger than a stage of 2. Téa, this was your year. Your book won the Trillium Award for Fiction. So let's give you the last 5 minutes that we have here. You can use as much or as little as you want, but I would love to hear a reading from your book.
I actually changed my reading last minute so I can sing this one part. So I'm going to read the first story, which is called Tits for Stigs, and it just kicks off the collection. Jolie was my first friend. Her name was actually Jolietta. I shortened it to Jolie upon meeting her. I felt it captured her spirit more, her essence. The name came from a song Mother used to sing when we lived in Congo, where it was hot and mosquitoes didn't sting because we coexisted with them. Bébé de maman, jolie, jolie, jolie. Bébé de maman, jolie, jolie, jolie. The song went. Mother stopped singing once we immigrated. She stopped doing many things, but I liked that she had given me this song so that I could now give it to somebody else. And Jolie was in fact Jolie. Long blonde hair, defined nose, blue in each eyes, roses in each cheeks, tall but not definingly so. She was the one to introduce me to the park. She was responsible for my popularity and my likability. She was herself popular and well-liked, and I gained her reputation by proximity. But still, I was the girl next door. Unlike Jolie, I had perfectly ashy elbows and naturally posed, and this was my advantage on Galloway. People could relate to that. As for Jolie, she was simply unattainable. To want a person like her was to want too much from life. To have a person like her was to have everything, and perhaps too soon. When we arrived, Jolie was sitting on the doorstep as though to check that the newcomers were freaks. And when she gave a 2 thumbs up to a bunch of kids watching from the side of the runabout. There was another set of low-rise townhouse, peeling in brown, identical to ours. The thumbs up meant that we were acceptable, that we had passed some unknown street cred test, and Jolie was both curator and writer of said test. She introduced herself while we were unloading the suitcases from the taxi. That's all we had, suitcases. We were lucky enough that the previous tenants had left behind some furniture and that whoever ran the complex took pity on our poverty and allowed us to claim it as our own. "Welcome to Galloway," Jolie said, reaching her hand to greet my father. As they shook hands, she grimaced a smile at him and stuck her tongue and winked. "Can he come out and play?" she asked. We all looked at Junior. "No, not him," Jolie said. "The other one." "Loli?" my father said, and that's when we realized she was referring to me. Thank you.
That actually goes on to, thank you very much for that reading. That I really like the father afterwards. He has a vetting process before he lets his daughter Loli play with Jolie, and he says, "Do you pray?" She goes, "Of course." And he was like, "Okay then." And then they go off and he needed to up his vetting process. Very, very, like, as you read on the book, I was like, that's not enough. But I really like that. That's like, I'm sure that happens often. Do you pray? That's all I need to know. Do you believe in God? That's all I need to know. Yeah, it's a very nice book, and it kicks off a wonderful book. A very nice story that kicks off a wonderful book. The nice thing about Word on the Street being virtual, as much as this is, a little bit out of people's element, I will say that when I host events like this, usually it's fans, it's diehard fans who come in and fill a room or a theater to see you. Here you will have fans watching you. You will also have people who are just curious about your work. And I think you've given people a really good background of who you are, what you do, how you do it, and what it is you worked on, and what it was that was worthy of a nomination and a win, in your case, Téa, of the Trillium Book Award. Zalika, your book is a collection of short stories written from the perspective of a woman growing up in the Jamaican community, discovering herself. Seth, your book, 20 Years in the Making, is the book Clyde Fans. It's a graphic novel that if people read it in an afternoon, we would impress upon them not to let you know that, right? If we've learned anything today,
That would
they
be
can
nice.
keep that to themselves. Martha, your book was very powerful. It's it's a collaboration, but it's really a communication between two sisters back and forth. One who's suffering quite significantly from mental health issues, schizophrenia being one of those things. And Téa, your book was really a nice. Although I wasn't able to complete all the stories. I could see this is a journey into womanhood, and a really interesting, creative one at that. And I can see why you were all nominated, and congratulations and to you for winning, Téa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For those of you who are listening, my name is Ali Hassan. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. All these authors, should be available for you to get in touch with if you have more questions. That is it for us. I'll turn things back over to Rebecca.
Thank you all. And Ali, we are going to work on getting you one of these shirts.
I thought the reading was enough of a gift, but the shirt will, of course.
Thank you so much for summarizing like all of the books. I think it's really interesting this year that we saw stories happening in such different formats, all being nominated for the same prize. Like it's, it really shows that storytelling takes many forms.
I agree, and that's why I did it. I wanted to show that it's a book award for fiction, but look at what fiction can be. It really doesn't have to be very narrow at all. It can be it's so broad and so interesting. Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. Congratulations to Zalika, Martha, Seth, Téa. Thank you so much to our host, Ali Hassan. This was such an inspired conversation. I think a lot of people are going to take a lot of heart from hearing your stories and how you arrived at the process of creating those stories. I definitely took a lot of inspiration from them. All right, and thank you for tuning in from home. If you would like to order any of the books from the Trillium Book Award for fiction, please head over to Another Story Bookshop. You'll find the link in the banner below and in the comments section. You can also find the link on our brand new website, again, toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca. We worked hard on it. We are so thrilled to be hosting our first ever virtual festival this weekend, September 26th and 27th. So don't forget to register for WOTS 2020. And you can visit our digital marketplace right now. It's happening September 21st to 30th, also linked to on our website. We wanted to create the browsing experience that you have every year at the Word on the Street in a virtual space where you can also interact with our exhibitors. So each night we are also hosting an IGTV series live on Instagram with our Bookstagram hosts. So you can tune into that at 6 p.m. as well. To support the Word on the Street and events like this one, please visit toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca and click that donate button. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.